Who Gets to Decide? A liberty-based podcast that brings a little piece of sanity to a confused society drowning in a culture of craziness. And here is your host, Seth Martin.
Well, all right. What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Who Gets to Decide. This is episode 636. I'm Seth Martin, your host. Thank you for joining me today. Glad you're here, and always happy you're listening. Today's Martin Luther King Day, and I still can't believe it's 2026. I mean, 2026 has come so fast and has already started with such a bang. Today's episode, we're gonna go back to Venezuela. We talked about this 2 episodes ago in episode 634. We talked about it in 634, and then a couple episodes before that, when the invasion happened the attack happened on January 3rd. And so this will be now the 3rd episode that we devoted to Venezuela just here in the beginning of 2026. Strap in. This is getting interesting. And most of this, I'm sure you haven't heard yet. There's been no real media attention on this yet. And it's sort of in the realm of speculation a little bit. But one of my favorite people posted something pretty interesting about Venezuela, about Dominion voting, Smartmatic, all this stuff. A guy named Ed Martin, who's a deputy attorney general or something, and he's prosecuting these things. So a lot of interesting things happening here that Thomas Sowell is talking about. And Thomas Sowell, for those of you who don't know, he's mostly an economist. He's a professor. And he normally doesn't talk too much about political things, which I thought was really interesting that he was talking about this. So essentially, he's talking about what he thinks is going on behind the scenes. And maybe it is going on behind the scenes. I don't really know. But Thomas Sowell is a very serious person. And if he's talking about it, it's probably happening. So let me just stipulate it like that. And this gives me a lot of hope because, as we mentioned previously, there's kind of 2 stories that I think pick the lock for Americans, like what is going on in America. Why can we not seem to get control of our government? Why do they do things that are not in our interest? Why? There's a lot of why questions about how the government operates and why it doesn't appear to operate properly. And there's kind of 2 main stories that deal with that. And one of them is Epstein, and the other one is this voting fraud situation, which appears to involve Venezuela and potentially a whole bunch of Democrats. And so this is, I think, worth getting into. It's worth talking about. It's worth digging deeper. We're going to hear from Sidney Powell. She was on Fox News here recently talking about the evidence they've been gathering. And so, I've been talking about if Trump doesn't get his crap together, the Republicans are going to lose the midterm. This may be the October surprise that nobody's really thinking about, is that there's going to be massive indictments of a lot of Democrats probably. And I don't know, man. I mean, you talk about disruptive. This is going to cause a lot of turmoil within the United States of America. And it'll be interesting to see what happens and who gets ensnared in all this. But it's probably a lot of people, a lot more than people are probably thinking, are involved in this, probably even some Republicans. And so this is going to be, if it comes to fruition, it's going to be very, very, it's going to be a watershed moment for the United States. So with that little teaser, let's jump right into what Thomas Sowell is talking about and break in from time to time and comment on it.
As it relates to holding Democrats and what many view as anti-American actors within the deep state to account, developments are moving at remarkable speed. We are talking about indictments, arrests, and criminal charges unfolding in rapid succession. In many respects, The apprehension of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela appears to have set this process in motion. Over the past 36 hours, fragments of information have emerged from Trump administration insiders, along with statements from President Trump himself, offering a clearer picture of what is happening behind the scenes. Today, the goal is to connect those dots and explain how these events fit together. Let's get into the news. To set the stage, let me introduce Ed Martin.
He currently serves as an associate deputy attorney at the Department of Justice and is President Trump's personally appointed pardon attorney with a mandate that goes beyond routine reviews.
His remit includes examining alleged criminal conduct tied to Democrats and, more narrowly, scrutinizing the legitimacy of Joe Biden's auto-pen pardons. For nearly 11 months, Martin has worked largely out of public view, methodically assembling cases behind closed doors against a range of Democratic figures and deep state operatives. That's why it caught attention yesterday when he broke his professional silence. For the first time in months, Martin surfaced publicly, posting not one but two notably pointed messages on his official government X account posts that were brief, deliberate, and by any measure, revealing. In the first post, he reposted a message that read, "I believe before the midterm election there will be a line of incarcerated bad guys longer than Black Friday at a Walmart." Ed Martin responded simply, "Fair prediction. If you stop and think about it, that reaction is revealing." Building airtight, prosecutable criminal cases takes time, months, sometimes years, especially if the goal is convictions that actually hold up. That is precisely the kind of work Martin and his team have been doing quietly throughout 2025. There's also a basic political reality at play. From a strategic standpoint, it makes far more sense to unveil major indictments in 2026, right in the heart of the midterm season, when their impact would be greatest. Like it or not, Americans have short political memories. Ask anyone to name the biggest political story from 7 weeks ago, and most people can't.
All right, let's stop there. Yeah, so this guy, Ed Martin, apparently has been working behind the scenes. And you don't see this guy. He's not on the Sunday circuit. He's not in the news very much. He's been working behind the scenes. And potentially this was all uncovered earlier in the year and earlier in 2025. And this is kind of why the narco terrorist thing and boat bombing and stuff just seemed to come out of left field. Maybe they were just building a case for going in there and nabbing Maduro because his name came up in this understanding of who owns what, who started it, who actually knows who all the bad actors are, we really don't know. I guess what we can say is that the whole narco terrorist thing and blowing boats up was kind of, I don't know, we talked about it on here. I didn't see that was a predicate for, invading a country. But maybe this is part of some larger thing for draining the swamp, which I do think is important. I mean, anything that focuses attention on the criminality that's happening within the United States, I think is an important thing for the Trump administration to be working on, whether it's Epstein or it's this Dominion voting scandal and the people involved and what is actually going on. I think this is an important aspect of understanding why our government, this government of, for, and by the people doesn't seem to work. It doesn't seem to be, it seems to be more working for people who just want to get in there and spend as much money as they can on all kinds of things, just whatever they can spend the money on. The more programs, the more stuff that's going on, the more opportunities there are to line their own pockets. And that's what it seems. That's what America seems to be about. There seems to be a sense that time is running out on America, and these people need to get theirs. They need to get their cut before the whole thing goes out. What Thomas Sowell is talking about is he's talking about timing. He's talking about very subtle signals. I don't know what caused him to talk about this. Thomas Sowell never talks about stuff like this, which is interesting. I think in and of itself that's interesting because Thomas Sowell is he's just a mild-mannered guy. He writes a lot and he does some interviews, but he's really never been somebody who operates in the realm of speculation, certainly not political speculation. So I just thought this was a really interesting post. It could be leading to something soon. And if that's the case, then God bless him, and I hope so. That's all I can say. Because the quicker we can get to what the hell's going on, the quicker we can get rid of, all these modern monetary theory people. All these people are basically Democrat. They're on the Democratic side of the aisle. All these people that constantly are peppering us with things that don't operate in reality. They're all on the Democratic side of the aisle. They're just way out of touch. It's like they're locked into this whole fiat money system, and it colors all their thinking about everything. They think anything is possible. You just print up more money. And I guess with the exception of getting elected, right? Printing up more money doesn't necessarily guarantee election. So we got to get behind, Dominion or Smartmatic or something like that and try to push for that. So I'm hoping there's going to be a huge perp walk. That's what he's talking about. That's what seems to be what Ed Martin is focused on. So let's continue here and see what else he's got to say.
News cycle moves fast, and even major stories fade within days. Seen in that light, the picture becomes clearer. Rather than rushing announcements now, the Trump administration appears content to sit on completed or near complete cases, holding them until the moment they matter most electorally. If that is the plan, Martin's brief comment wasn't casual at all. It was a signal that timing, not haste, is driving what comes next. But as I mentioned, Ed Martin made a second, far more curious post later that same afternoon. He replied to a comment that read, "It's going to be wild when Maduro tries to plead to lesser charges by offering evidence that the 2020 election was stolen." Martin's response was not a denial, not a clarification, but a single exclamation point. That reaction matters. It suggests more than casual amusement. Taken together with his earlier comment, it reads like a deliberate signal rather than an offhand remark. The implication is not only that the Biden auto pen pardons may face serious legal challenge, but that larger developments are being anticipated, timed, and managed. More striking still is what this implies about Maduro himself. If he is facing life-ending federal charges, the incentives are obvious. Defendants in that position do not stay silent. They bargain, they cooperate. And if Maduro possesses information that implicates American political actors who interacted with or relied on his regime, the pressure to disclose it will be immense. At minimum, Martin's response suggests the Justice Department is not dismissing that possibility. And if so, the scope of what emerges next may extend well beyond Venezuela and well beyond what most observers currently expect. This situation becomes even more intriguing when you add one more detail from yesterday.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll exceed my expectations. I'm pretty doom and gloom about all this stuff, but even my expectations will likely be exceeded, because I'm guessing there probably are some Republicans going to get ensnared in this as well. This desire to stay in power once you're in office is pretty powerful. these guys are very paranoid. They're very narcissistic. They want to stay in power. They don't trust anybody. They don't trust the pollsters. They don't trust anybody, right? They're just constantly like a nervous, long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. And so I'm sure the temptation to get a guaranteed electoral win is probably, it's probably not something that's easily turned away. And so there's going to be people involved in this that we don't expect to be involved. And then, of course, all the people we do expect to be involved, they'll probably be involved. It's interesting that to that one tweet, Ed Martin just put an exclamation point. He didn't really say anything. Kind of a little teaser there. But my impression is this is something Thomas Sowell has been following very closely. He's not somebody that just wades into a subject and says a handful of things and then runs off. I mean, he's somebody who is very thoughtful. He knows a lot of people. He doesn't even get involved in this much, but I suspect that this stuff really bothers him like it bothers me. And he's devoted some amount of time in the background to this because I just don't see Thomas Sowell posting anything really anymore. I mean, he used to do interviews where they would talk about economic stuff, but I've never seen him really post anything in the political realm. So anyway, I just thought this was interesting. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I'm going to play a little bit and then I'm going to fast forward a little bit because there's some stuff toward the end I think is very interesting and it's worth talking about a little bit.
Today afternoon, former National Security Advisor General Michael Flynn shared a post that raised eyebrows for many of the same reasons. Flynn reposted a Truth Social message from President Trump in which the president asserted that the CIA overthrew the U.S. government on November 3rd, 2020. And that Dominion deleted 2.7 million Trump votes nationwide. Those were President Trump's words posted publicly on his own account, and Flynn amplified them without qualification. What makes the timing notable is that Trump made that post within roughly 2 hours of Nicolas Maduro's apprehension by U.S. Special Forces in Caracas. That sequence matters. It suggests intent rather than coincidence. So it raises an obvious question: why would the first public statement from the president, immediately after capturing a foreign dictator, pivot directly to claims of election interference and a CIA-backed coup? In politics, timing is rarely accidental. And when figures at this level choose their moments carefully, it usually signals that events behind the scenes are beginning to converge. It may also have something to do with the fact that President Trump had his newly appointed CIA director, John Ratcliffe, standing beside him in the command room, watching the apprehension of Maduro unfold live. As the saying goes, times change, and they are changing quickly. What is difficult to ignore is what followed. In the roughly 36 hours since Maduro was taken into custody, President Trump has repeatedly and publicly returned to one subject: election interference. He has reposted videos, referenced the CIA role in the 2020 election, raised questions about Dominion voting machines, and again mentioned Venezuelan-linked Smartmatic software. The volume alone is striking. More striking still is the timing. Trump did not gradually ease back into these claims. He opened the door wide almost immediately after Maduro's arrest.
Yeah, this is an interesting point, and we kind of talked about this the other day in episode 634. We were talking about how this seems to be related to election fraud, and you don't send in a military operation into a foreign country And then when it's over, sit around and every time somebody sticks a microphone in your mouth, you talk about election fraud and Smartmatic and Dominion and the 2020 election. And people want to know what's happening next in Venezuela, right? And it could be that we have no interest in doing anything in Venezuela except getting Maduro's testimony about election fraud. So that's kind of interesting because it suggests that potentially there is no new war in Venezuela. There's not going to be a war. Informs some of what Trump is doing around leaving the vice president in charge. I mean, I don't get me wrong. I think they're going to drive a wedge into all these funding problems, okay? And they're going to, we, the United States, are going to help Venezuela get back on track. But I don't think we're going to go put some puppet in there. We're gonna make sure that that Venezuela gets to vote for Venezuelans, and I don't think it's going to be run at all like the Middle East. It again, just looking back on it after all these events have unfolded, it seems to be that we went and we basically nabbed this guy because he's a witness. He's a witness to a huge crime that impacts America in a major way. And he's likely going to name all these people, and it's going to be epic. It's going to be like the single largest event in draining the swamp is what it looks like we're trying to do. Now, whether or not we can do this and whether or not this actually happens, this all remains to be seen. I mean, we know that this is a difficult thing to uncover for sure. I mean, just look at the difficulty we're having around getting to the bottom of what happened with the Obama administration and how they changed the intelligence report on Trump about the Russian interference. I mean, we're just now getting to the bottom of that. Tulsi Gabbard's doing a great job there. So it looks like, I don't know about 4D chess, but it looks like Trump has identified a couple of different key areas where there's major swamp activity, and he's moving forward to drain it. So kudos to Trump, I guess. And look, I guess I recognize that some of this needs to be done in secret so that it doesn't get foiled. You know, you remember the deep state people can interfere with what you're trying to do, right? Because you kind of need them. And so if you can do a certain amount of this work without their knowledge, then by the time you get to, some sort of critical point, then it's too late for them to even try to interfere at that point. So maybe that's what's going on here. Just really interesting that that Thomas Sowell is involved in this. I've never seen him do this kind of thing before. I want to fast forward to this point where he talks about this whistleblower because I think that's important. And then I want to get to the Sidney Powell talk toward the end, which I think is also important because Sidney Powell did try to bring all this up. And, you have to remember people were indicted in Georgia in Arizona because they sent another slate of electors. And, they called that election interference, which is not election interference, but, states have the prerogative to send whatever electors they want to cast their vote in Congress. But this kind of stuff happened and people went to jail or were prosecuted at least over this stuff. So this is going to right a lot of wrongs if we do move in this direction and this does come out. I, for one, hope it does. All right, let's continue with Thomas Sowell.
One pause. In fact, consider this example. Just yesterday afternoon, President Trump reposted a video stating, "Trump just reposted this video about Dominion voting machine fraud. You think the timing is a coincidence?" A Venezuelan military intelligence whistleblower has confirmed the CIA outsourced election rigging technology, Smartmatic and Dominion, from Maduro's Venezuela. That post came directly from Trump himself. At this point, the signal is hard to miss. The message is not subtle. Trump is clearly pointing back to a narrative that has been circulating for years. The claims surrounding Dominion, Smartmatic, and Venezuelan election technology did not suddenly appear overnight. They have been discussed publicly before, most notably by former federal prosecutor and former General Flynn attorney Sidney Powell, who raised these issues years ago. And that context matters.
Well, I can hardly wait to put forth all the evidence we have collected on Dominion, starting with the fact it was created to produce altered voting results in Venezuela for Hugo Chavez, and then shipped internationally to manipulate votes for purchase in other countries, including this one. It was funded by money from Venezuela and Cuba, and China has a role in it also. So if you want to talk about foreign election interference, we certainly have it now. We have staggering statistical evidence. We have staggering testimony from witnesses, including one who was personally in briefings when all of this was discussed and planned, beginning with Hugo Chavez and how it was designed there, and then saw it happening in this country. As soon as the state shut down on election night and stopped counting, those are the states where the most egregious problems occurred. We also need to look at, and we're beginning to collect evidence on the financial interests of some of the governors and secretaries of state who actually bought into the Dominion systems, surprisingly enough. Hunter Biden type graft to line their own pockets by getting a voting machine in that would either make sure their election was successful or they got money for their family from it.
Yeah, pretty egregious stuff. And Sidney Powell was laughed at back in 2020, 2021. And Rudy Giuliani, he was kind of involved in that with her, and he ended up being sued and bankrupted. I mean, it was just a disaster, the backlash that happened for trying to tell the truth, for trying to alert the world that a major crime had taken place, and there was just, the media was all against them. It was unbelievable, looking back on it. And one of the things I think will be good if this all comes to fruition is just vindication for all these people. All these people tried to speak up and tell the truth and alert fellow citizens to what was going on, and they were just treated like criminals themselves. And I just look forward to the day that they're vindicated, because it's just disgraceful the way the media treated Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani and people like that. People that have been servants of this country for decades were just treated like common criminals. It's unbelievable. And so I'm glad Thomas Sowell's talking about this. I have no idea why he's talking about it now. It's got to be because it's very, very important to him, and because Thomas Sowell never wades into political discussions. Never. I mean, it just doesn't happen. And so I thought this was a signal in and of itself that he was talking about this. And anyway, let's let him wrap up, and then we'll close up the show.
As things now stand, Sidney Powell appears close to vindication. She raised these allegations early, at a time when doing so carried professional and personal costs, and history has a way of revisiting claims that were once dismissed out of hand. If that reassessment is coming, it will not be subtle. After weighing the material covered today, it is reasonable to expect that 2026 will be consequential, and that may be overdue. Questions surrounding elections, foreign involvement, and political accountability do not disappear by being ignored. If the country intends to govern itself seriously, those questions must be confronted directly.
Yeah, I agree. I think back to when Trump was elected in 2016, people were just all in on this Russia collusion thing. There was no retrospective at all about the Democrats' role, the Democrats' role in having Trump elected, meaning the way that Barack Obama governed and just wrecked the country. I mean, really, in retrospect, Obama really wrecked the country. And when I say Obama, I mean Obama's administration, his governing of the country was, it just appeared to be intentionally destructive. And we're still reeling from that damage. Now, Trump's done some damage of his own, but nothing compared to the damage that Obama did. But yeah, look, I'm really excited about Sidney Powell being vindicated. Hopefully that happens. And Rudy Giuliani, and there's a whole bunch of people. General Flynn got caught up in this, and he ended up getting prosecuted for lying, which is stupid. We can't, the government can lie to us, but we can't lie to the government. I mean, that's absurd, right? And so, to me, these two things I mentioned before, Epstein and this voting scandal, I think really explain a lot about why we feel like we're not living in our government anymore. We're living in some foreign government. Now, I don't think this is going to fix all these problems, right? I think the money thing is still core. If you don't have honest money, these problems are not going to go away. But at least you can get these crooks out of the body politic, which I think is causing a lot of problems. They seem to control these narratives, and they control the media, and they control all these things where people you just can't function because there's just so much misinformation. I mean, I hate to even use that word. They talk about this kind of thing being misinformation, and all they do is lie about what's happening. It's just very frustrating, and hopefully we'll see that come to a close quickly. But I'm going to put a link to this in the show notes page, but go watch a couple of videos on Thomas Sowell just to kind of get a sense of who he is and what his work is about. He's a very interesting person. He's getting up there in age. Walter Williams was another black economist that was very, very good. And of course he passed last year or the year before, I can't remember. And, Thomas Sowell's getting up there in age, and so we're not going to have him much longer. So I'm glad he's here now to read the tea leaves for us and tell us that some good news is coming, because we need, all of us need some good news about the direction of the United States of America, because it hasn't been such great news lately, other than closing the border, and there seems to be a negative flow across the border now, which is great, or negative immigration into the United States. And I don't know, it seems like hanging on to our culture here in the United States has become increasingly difficult, and we need to be able to get that back. So I'm glad Thomas Sowell's here to give us this information. Go look into his life's work a little bit, and I think you'll be very impressed. All right, with that, I'm going to wrap up the show. Thank you guys for coming in. Thanks for listening. If you haven't gone to YouTube, go to YouTube and watch a couple episodes there on YouTube and subscribe, and help me get those algorithms running. It looks like, a lot of you are still listening on Spotify or Apple Podcatchers or whatever podcatcher out there, but still not many people on YouTube. So if you would help me get that YouTube algorithm kickstarted. All right, everybody, thanks, and Happy New Year. Happy Martin Luther King Day, and we'll see you next time on Who Gets to Decide. Peace.